Hello and welcome to another episode of The Brothers Discuss. I am Alex.
And I'm Chris.
All right, well, it looks like we're getting closer to the finale of the summer movie season of this year. I mean, we've still got a few movies coming out next month, but I don't think anyone really cares about those movies.
No.
Um, so we've kind of reached like the pinnacle of this season, and for once, there are no superhero movies to discuss in this episode. Like we always talk about superhero movies. It's just three movies that are, I mean, there's some IP in there, but no superhero movies. It's kind of funny to think how we talk about box office. We talk a lot about that on our show and whether or not certain box office numbers are meaningful. And at the end of the year, I would predict in the top five, you are not going to see a Marvel movie in the top five of the box office of the year unless the Marvels blows things out of the water, which I don't predict it will. But yeah, it's kind of amazing that I think we're moving on a little bit from the superhero era dominating Hollywood, which is a good thing. And I like to see more stuff get made.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
But now let's get talking about some casting for Superman Legacy. On that note, I guess we got to talk about this. So we got some casting before the SAG strike, of course, where we have, I'm going to butcher his name, but it's Darwin from First Class, Eddie Gathegi, I think is that how you say his name, as Mr. Terrific. We have Isabella Merced as Hawkgirl, and Nathan Fillion as Green Lantern of the Guy Gardner variety.
Okay.
And what are your thoughts on this?
I most of the cast, honestly, I don't really know, which is kind of a good thing. I like that for a Superman movie, it's such an obscure cast for the most part, and I think that's a neat little take on Superman. It kind of sets the expectations on like how this movie's going to play out and just how grand scale it's going to be. And I don't think it's going to go too big, so that kind of has me a little excited.
Yeah, I mean, we're just adding more and more superheroes into this Superman movie, it seems. So, but I mean, it's kind of amazing that Nathan Fillion is someone who has voiced Green Lantern in projects, and now he's cast as a Green Lantern in this movie. But if you've been following that fan casting of Nathan Fillion as a Green Lantern, it's a long time coming, I guess.
Yeah.
If anyone ever watched the Daily Show episode, a little web series with Tim and Sam Daly, but yeah, I like the idea of this Superman movie having other superheroes established in it, and Gunn has been pretty adamant about it's not to set up other movies. Basically, it's not what Batman versus Superman did, and this is just these characters exist in this world. Not that they're going to get their own movies, but they're around, and I think that's interesting. So, and also Nathan Fillion, he was also in the Suicide Squad as well. He was TDK.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, confirms that this is like a reboot territory. And I know some fans are like confused, like when does this new universe officially start? Like I get that. I get the confusion and all that. But for me, all I care about are just getting good movies. That's all I really care about. I do want to pose this question to you though. So with the last writer's strike, they were in the midst of trying to kickstart a DC Universe franchise with George Miller's Justice League Mortal that was cast. There were costumes made, previs and everything. They were ready to go, which just never happened because, not just because of the writer's strike, there were other reasons. And obviously this is a little different of a scenario, but one of the things that happened back then was that there was a competing Batman film at the same time. It was a little film called The Dark Knight. You might have heard of it. It's a pretty good movie if you like good movies, I guess. But and right now, obviously, we also have a competing Batman film with Robert Pattinson. But the difference is like none of the filmmakers or cast are outright like protesting the idea of merging their franchise with a Justice League.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting. Like, could we see a similar scenario where this movie ultimately never gets made, where it's cast and everything, but it just never happens because of the writer's strike? But I mean, it's a slightly different scenario in the sense that the people that run the company aren't making the movies themselves. Like, is
Yeah,
James Gunn gonna fire himself? I don't think so.
exactly. Yeah.
What do you
Um,
think?
it's kind of interesting you bring that up, and in terms of like these big kind of cinematic universe IPs, we've just seen it like yesterday with all like the Sony movies that got delayed, like
Yeah.
Craven being delayed by like almost a whole year. And
And Beyond the Spider-Verse is delayed indefinitely, which I honestly I think that's a good thing because I
yeah,
think
I'm
give the
glad.
animators the time and the
Exactly.
salary they deserve. So
Exactly. So I mean, I still, I mean, I think it'll still come out. It's just a matter of like, will it get delayed into oblivion? Is it going to be like another Flash instance, or yeah, we don't know. And it honestly just depends on like how much longer the strikes are just going to go for. We
yeah.
seriously just don't know at this point. So I'm sure it'll still release. And as for like all of the DC projects, half of them I think are probably up in the air. Just with all of this going on, I really don't
Yeah.
know. So
And like on top of that, I mean, Warner Brothers are even kind of, I mean, I get the impression that they don't care about Blue Beetle. I mean, this was a movie that was originally designed for their streaming service,
mhm.
and now it's got a theatrical release, but I've not seen a ton of marketing for this movie. I mean,
No.
if they don't spend the money on marketing, they're not losing money.
Yeah.
And I think Warner Brothers are thinking like, look, we're starting fresh. We've got this other stuff left over. I guess maybe they have some faith in Aquaman, which they might be pushing back again. Like that was meant to come out last year. And
Right.
I say who gives a damn about Aquaman because who cares? But it did make a lot of money. So obviously Warner Brothers sees some value in it, but I do not give a damn about an Aquaman movie anymore, especially
Yeah.
when we're starting new and starting fresh with this DC Universe stuff, and this is just leftovers. So, yeah. I will say though, before Barbie, I did get a trailer for Blue Beetle, and I heard a kid say, "That looks interesting," and it got the entire theater to laugh. So here we go, Zaslav. We got one kid coming to your movie. You got one down, maybe a million more to go. You got this, Zaslav. Um, okay. So let's get to talking about movies now. Let's talk about real grown-up adult movies. God damn it. So first, we're talking about the latest, but not the last, Mission Impossible film. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Unlike Spider-Verse, they stuck to their guns and just called it Part 1.
Yeah. Yeah. And also kind of different is that this doesn't really feel like one giant movie. This kind of just feels like an entry to a two-parter, like how it
Yeah.
should.
It
Um,
doesn't end on a cliffhanger, even though they're literally hanging on a cliff at one point.
yeah, yeah, no, it seriously feels just like a normal movie, despite it being a two-parter.
Yeah.
So
So what did you think of this new movie?
I thought it was pretty good. Mm, I wasn't too blown away by it, and I wasn't too into the movie, but I didn't hate it either. I thought it was fairly competent. Um, I think part of my reasoning though is that I I was debating on whether or not I'd rewatch all of the Mission Impossible movies before this because it's like you don't really need to watch all of these to understand what's happening. They're all, for the most part, just kind of their own standalone films outside of this being a two-parter. And I went with it anyways because I haven't seen like those older movies in a few years now, and
Mm.
I actually really loved rewatching all of them. It was really great. And I think I kind of messed with my own expectations because I watched Rogue Nation and Fallout literally hours before I watched Reckoning. And I
So you
feel
like basically binged the Christopher McQuarrie era like
basically, yeah.
simultaneously.
And it's not that I thought Dead Reckoning was bad in any way. I thought it was pretty entertaining, but I feel like those other two movies set the bar pretty high for what I was going in with Dead Reckoning. So I feel like that kind of dampened my experience a little bit, and a pretty not so great theater experience too. So, but I still found it very entertaining. The action sequences are really well done for the most part, and Tom Cruise, he still got it. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Mission Impossible films, you can argue that none of them are bad. I mean, obviously the second one is the one that people don't like, but each Mission Impossible film, I guess kind of leading up to the fifth one, do feel like a reflection of what action movies feel like at the time. Like they're kind of like a time capsule in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, each one. But Dead Reckoning Part 1, I just think it's a really good film. I mean, everyone's talking about the stunts, obviously. That's what the Mission Impossible films are kind of known for. You kind of go in knowing that he really did this, so that is a part of the fun. So there's kind of a meta nature about the Mission Impossible films now where you know this crazy man, Tom Cruise, is actually jumping a motorcycle off of a cliff. And I mean, it's spectacular to see. And on top of that, it's an engaging story. So it's still a good spy story on top of the spectacle of the stunts and the action set pieces.
Yeah.
And Mission Impossible film since the fifth one, when Christopher McQuarrie came on, these kind of feel like their own separate part of the franchise a little bit in terms of telling a cohesive story you can watch film by film, whereas the others all have like an entirely different cast and everything. It sort of starts with the fourth one, but the fifth one is really where that begins. But at the same time, it felt at the time that Fallout was the culmination of all of the films that we have seen so far. And then you get to this one, and it feels very closely connected to the first De Palma film. So it's kind of interesting how if you put these on like a mind map, and these link in this way, and these link in another way, it's interesting.
It is very interesting, yeah.
And so the villain of this movie is someone that I guess kind of predates the series. He's someone from Ethan Hunt's past. And I guess before I get into that, I mean, I should talk. Like, there were actually discussions of doing a de-aged Tom Cruise scene in this movie that we never got. But they ultimately voted against it. And I liked it because we do see a young Ethan Hunt. We just don't focus on his face. They gave him slightly longer hair, which I think was great because Tom Cruise's hair length changes depending on the film. It used to be like short, long with each movie, and then I guess Christopher McQuarrie was like, "Stop growing out your hair."
Yeah, just keep it short.
Yeah. So if it takes place before the first one, that would technically mean that it's supposed to be longer.
Yeah,
So it works. Yeah. But it is funny hearing Tom Cruise. I've read that he said he watched a bunch of de-aging scenes and he said, some were good, some were bad. And it's like, that is absolutely true. A good example of it looks good and it looks bad to me is Michael Douglas in the Marvel films, where it looks so good in the first Ant-Man, that one scene in the beginning. Then in the prologue scene in the second Ant-Man film, it looks a little worse. And then when you get to Endgame, where he's meant to be younger again, it's got that really uncanny valley smooth effect, and it's only on screen for like less than 30 seconds, so it's fine. We know it is what it is, but it is funny how it looks so good in the first one, where you go, wow, this is great, and by the most recent time they did it, it should look better, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think back to one of the first de-aging effects in a really big movie, funnily enough, I think was X-Men 3. They look okay. Um, I think for the time in 2006, I think it's decent. Like, even at the time, people were like, that looks bad. And you had people that were like, that looks amazing. And I think there's an interview with Patrick Stewart at the time where he's like, I think they did it a little too much. And then you look at him 3 years later in X-Men Origins Wolverine, where he looks so much worse. And of course, the effects in that film are not good, and I don't know if he actually filmed anything for that. Like, I've never seen any images of him behind the scenes, or he could be just 100% computer generated. I actually don't know. But he does say like you're safe now or something like that. So maybe they got him for 30 seconds and wrapped. But yeah, anyway, it's funny how he's talked about like, yeah, sometimes it looks really good, and then further down the line in a franchise it looks worse, which shouldn't. That shouldn't be how it is. When technology should get better with time. But of course, that's a big part of the movie about AI, and that's really the villain of the movie, not just this guy from Ethan Hunt's past, but also this threat of this program that will make you think you're actually hearing like Simon Pegg in your ear when it's not really him.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't say. I guess we're in spoiler talk now. So, yeah, what do you think of the villain?
So the entity, as it's called.
Entity. That's right. I forgot.
I'm a little. I mean, I really love the idea of it. Like, I actually think that's really neat, especially just especially with like today's world. It's not at all hard to think like, yeah, this is something that could very well happen. We have AI that can do some pretty freaky stuff now. So, I think though, like whenever characters in the movie are just talking about the entity, it feels very, very dated. Like a B movie in like the 80s talking about like how computers are going to destroy the world type of dated. But that's just when they're talking about it. Like there's that scene where like you have all the characters in like this party and it's kind of revealed like that's where like the entity is or whatever. It's right before Rebecca Ferguson, we're in spoilers now, right before she dies. And it's just like it's a really long scene and they're just going back and forth between like talking about the entity, and the dialogue there felt very dated, but when it actually does stuff, you're just kind of like, oh, okay, this is more interesting. You can see like how this can really be harmful and impactful for these type of characters and their actions. So I think overall, like it is actually a really neat idea for having a thing be the villain rather than just like another bad guy that wants revenge or something.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, then the action is still top notch as always. Like like in the train sequence, like I was literally like on the edge of my seat, like leaning forward, like watching the screen as Ethan Hunt and Catwoman, I guess. It's essentially Catwoman. Like, what was Haley Atwell's character's name?
Grace.
Grace, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hunt and Grace are going from train car to train car as they're like hanging off of a cliff, and just like, oh my god, like the stuff with like the piano where it's hanging on essentially by a thread, and that stuff was so exciting. Like, and there's no music; it's just filled with tension. I love that.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's visual effects and special effects used in that scene a little bit, but it's a good example of how you can balance both, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Mission Impossible films. So yeah, I mean, tons of exciting sequences. I mean, the whole car chase in Vienna was really spectacular to watch. And also, I've heard Tom Cruise in the past talk about how he loves silent film, and there's clearly some kind of slapstick buffoonery a little bit in that scene. Like the car goes turning around and they swap seats somehow, but that stuff was fun as well.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a pretty spectacular film. It's funny when you get to the end because you're reminded, oh yeah, like this is only part one, because suddenly we're told, or we hear a voiceover, I should say, where I can tell this is where the film is going to end here. And this did have more of an ending over Spider-Verse, but it's still a cliffhanger in the sense that you know this isn't the end of the story. There's a lot more to be told, but at the same time, there's kind of a wrap-up of the story with it. Like, is it the CIA characters that are following Ethan Hunt around? Like Shea Wiggum. I got to talk about him real quick. He's my new favorite character in the series because he keeps on grabbing people's faces to see if they're wearing a mask, and it was great.
Yeah.
And man, what a summer for him, huh?
Oh yeah, he's in Spider-Verse.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the film?
Nothing too much. I mean, again, I didn't think this was necessarily as good as some of the more past few movies in the franchise, but I still enjoyed it for the most part. And I seriously think like Mission Impossible, outside of the second one, even though I really don't hate the second one, I
I
actually
don't
kind
either.
of like sometimes ironically, but I still really enjoy it. But it's still like that's the only one that's like not amazing or like not great, and all the other ones are like, yeah, this is really great stuff. So it's a really great franchise, even golly, almost 30 years later,
Oh
and
man.
nothing in it feels stale, and it actually just keeps getting better overall. So yeah, it's I recommend this one, and yeah, I'm excited for part two.
As am I. I mean, I I hate the argument of like, oh, it's not a complete story, so you can't judge this movie until you've seen the next one. Like, I don't think that's really how that works. Like, I don't know where that mindset comes from. Like, I mean, I've got like a lot of respect for Tarantino, but I don't like
Yeah.
that he thinks of the two Kill Bills as one movie. Like when he's like, I'm only going to make 10 movies, but two of them count as one or whatever. And it's like, those are two separate movies, right? Like this is its own film for sure. Like Spider-Verse was, but if for some reason we don't get beyond the Spider-Verse, I'm still very happy with Across the Spider-Verse as a movie. Like I
Mhm.
was very happy with that experience. I mean, similar with this, where it's exciting to see where they go next, and the fact that we don't know anything about it is exciting as well. I mean, sometimes with these things, some actors have already been cast or they've already started shooting. So there's been photos or like how we knew things about Endgame technically before seeing Infinity War because they shot them together. So we're
Mhm.
kind of at that point where it's like, I don't know where the next one's really going to go. There's an idea, and obviously he has to even things with the villain. I mean, just quickly, that's one slight criticism I kind of have with the movie is that the stuff with the villain, Isai Morales' character it's a little underdeveloped.
Yeah.
You're kind of just told that he does something and you see images of it and that's it.
I mean,
But
I'm assuming they're just waiting for part two for that, but
exactly. Like I'm guessing we're gonna get more of that. I guess for now it was enough to say he's someone from his past. We're not
yeah,
meant to like him and that's enough.
yeah,
But I'm thinking we probably get a little more depth with that character in the next one.
probably.
Yeah, but regardless, it's a good film. I'm excited for the next one.
Yeah, yeah, same here.
Um, I've got a lot of respect for Tom Cruise as a creative and a filmmaker, if you want to call him that, and a performer. But I do get a little bit of a sense of, him throwing a tantrum like these other movies are going to take away my IMAX screens. I'm going to be in cinemas longer, so it feels a little bit like that, but it's fine. Like, I'm happy for people who get to see this. I would
Mm.
hate for people to have missed out on seeing this movie because some other big films come out a week later. But I mean, we've talked on this pod as we've chronicled the busiest summer that we've had post-pandemic, where we have had a big release every week, and it's been leading up to Barbenheimer Day,
Here we go.
where both of these films came out on the same day, and I'll admit the meme got a little old for me, but it's a big day, and this used to happen all the time. Big films used to be released on the same day all the time. I mean,
Mhm.
people have been pointing out to Mamma Mia and The Dark Knight coming out the same day, and that wasn't really news back then because that just happened a lot when studios made a lot more movies, and so few films come out that way anymore. And with streaming films, you don't have to be released on a Thursday. They can be released any day of the week. So
Yeah.
this happens less, and studios are, I guess, less willing to compete with one another on the same day and hurt their own box office. But I guess Warner Brothers were happy to hurt their competition with some things. But yeah, let's talk about Barbie.
Let's do it.
Um, I think it's good to start it with. I mean, well, first off, did you do the full Barbenheimer experience?
Yes, I did. I watched Barbie minutes before my Oppenheimer screening, so uh,
Same.
yeah. So I got the full experience. Yeah.
Very good. So you watch. So I presume you watched Barbie then Oppenheimer.
Yeah, Barbie then Oppenheimer, which
Okay.
watching the movies now, I feel like it would be pretty hard to do it the other way around.
I
But
agree
we'll
with that.
that.
I think it's good to start it with the fun one, even though there is a lot of existential crisis in Barbie and themes of feminism and patriarchy and all of that.
Lots of very adult themes in this movie, which kind of
Yeah.
surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a film that's not for kids, at least like little kids.
Yeah.
I think if you are like a preteen, I think you might get a little more out of it, maybe.
I
But
mean, it does have a PG-13 rating, which caught me off guard when I heard that. I was like, what? But
yeah, and it's weird because I mean it's a Barbie movie. I mean kids are gonna want to see like this bright pink movie, and
I mean, you still get that, but yeah,
well, yes, and even like in like just the trailers beforehand, I mean they were all like kid centric. Like there
Mhm.
was I think we had like the new Illuminati movie, or not Illuminati, Illumination animation movie with the ducks.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I also had the trailer for Wonka beforehand and Haunted Mansion, which makes sense. Kids can see these, so it makes sense. But they're also slightly aimed at a little older audience, so they're not little kid movies. And then we got uh, Gran Turismo, which I don't know who that's marketed for. I have no clue. Uh, and Motherfucker gets said in the movie, but it's bleeped, so that was something.
Yeah.
And I did have kids in my session that I could tell were bored out of their minds because I can hear them talking.
Oh boy.
And I was thinking, ooh, this is not for them. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's Barbie, so of course kids are going to want to see this, but I also think it's fun enough that they will get something out of it. But the scenes where like Barbie is kind of sitting there looking at people and some people are just depressed and some people are like making out and she's all sad and she's starting to feel emotions for the first time. Like I don't know if a kid is going to connect to this, but at the same time, you can make that argument about the Marvel movies or anything like that kids are going to see. So I don't
Exactly.
think it's the end of the world that they didn't make this for families, but that's just an interesting comment that I think should be addressed.
Yeah, yeah.
So with all that said, what did you think of Barbie?
I really loved Barbie. I mean, again, I was surprised by how adult this movie was and how it really just went for it for a movie with a pretty sizable IP, and it felt very kind of I don't know, just very like self-contained in that sort of way of like what kind of story it's trying to tell. But it was also like a really funny film, like genuinely one of the funniest films I've seen in a really long time. So um, I usually don't laugh out loud too much in a movie theater, but I actually did quite a lot in this movie. So
I did too.
um, yeah, so I really enjoyed Barbie a lot. So
Nice. I'm gonna be a little more critical in this one than you, I feel. I will preface this by saying I think this is a super fun movie.
yeah.
Like, it really truly is. And like it has something to say. Like there's themes and messages in the film. So it feels like an actual movie and not like a commercial product.
Hmm.
So it's smarter than your average dumb movie. But that said, I feel like the themes and messages are like half baked and kind of broad and simplistic. And like I'll get into all that in a bit,
Okay, okay.
um, I'll start this off by saying I just love the production design quite a bit, like the
Oh, for
look of Barbie Land. And just at the beginning, I knew I was in a good place where like we would get to the beach. We're introduced to Beach Ken,
hmm.
and he's like, "Hey, check this out." And he tries to surf, but then he gets hit by the wave and just goes flying across. And
Yeah.
it just looks so goofy. And it's like a kid like throwing their dolls in the air.
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
doesn't look real. I mean, and that's the thing in general. Like, I feel like they get like the playful use of Barbies, where
Hmm.
like you as a if you're a kid playing Barbies, like you're not gonna like articulate them to like open a door to get out of the house. No, they're just gonna float down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's a really like self-aware movie. Like it knows what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and in that scene, we also got Alan, who's played by Michael Cera, and like when that happens, the camera pushes on him, going like, "No!" And I laughed a lot. I loved Alan. Alan's one of the funniest characters in this
It was
movie.
great. Uh,
And the Kens were great too. I mean, I originally wrote a review on Letterboxd that I quickly deleted, where I wrote, "Poor Ken, except for the Shang-Chi one. Fuck that Ken." um, there was the Ken that was what's his name? Hang on. Kingsley Ben-Adir. He's the villain in the latest Marvel show, which I've not watched.
Yeah.
But he's a really good actor in other stuff, and he's always good. But I found him very entertaining as well in this, and just
For
some
sure.
of his reactions in the background, I would just notice and just
It was
laugh.
so
But
great. Yeah.
Ryan Gosling, though, he is so funny in this
Yes.
movie. He stole the show for me. He's been funny for a very long time when you think about like The Nice Guys or Crazy Stupid Love. He's been very funny in comedies, but he is in his element in this. He's so good. His
Mm.
timing's great, and when Barbie kind of fake asks him out on a date and he has to go away for a second to think about it, and you just hear him yell, "Sublime!" I died. He's great in this.
He's terrific. Yeah.
And then there's the real world elements of this movie, which there's some really funny moments in the real world. But I think part of my problem is that like Barbie Land is very funny, but why is the real world also goofy? You know?
I I didn't think like the real world was like, with the exception of Will Ferrell, which if I had any big complaints, it's like that whole corporate kind of side to it, and like the jokes really weren't all that funny, or I mean, maybe at first they were, but then they just get old because it's like the same joke on repeat. Um, and yeah, that kind of nature of it felt pretty goofy, but I mean, the rest of the real world stuff I was fine with.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of weird decisions in the real world. I felt like when Barbie and Ken first get to the real world, like almost instantly everyone is like hitting on Barbie, and then Barbie is like, so she goes to the construction workers, and which I like the joke where it's like, because they come from Barbie Land, it's all run by women,
Hmm.
and she's like, "Oh, here's some construction workers. Here's some like female empowerment or whatever," and then she tells the construction workers like, "Just so you know, I don't have a vagina. He doesn't have a penis," and they're like, "Oh, that's fine." And like, wait, what? Why is that the response? Like, they should be weirded out by this. Like, I don't get it. Like, that's what I mean by like there's just some weird choices in the real world.
Yeah,
And
I guess I wasn't too bothered by that.
I don't know, but there's stuff I do like when you get to Mattel, like there's a bit where where a worker has a phone call in his cubicle, and it's like FBI here. And it's a split screen with the bright, and it's just such a funny moment. Like I love that shot. Like the extras in the background are all meeting each other in the split screen and just walking, and I thought that was a very composed sequence and shot. So
Yeah.
that was great. And then of course Will Ferrell is like, I mean, if you thought like there were like Lego movie comparisons, I mean, you have Will Ferrell here as like president business.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I mean, there's a bit where they chase Barbie in the office, and then and Will Ferrell's like a very stiff runner, and
Yeah,
then
his
like there's a point where like they cross paths, and then Will Ferrell realizes, oh, stupid, I was supposed to catch her. And so he does like some fun physical comedy.
Mhm.
But it's just like one of those weird things like, why is the real world this goofy?
Yeah, yeah. For stuff in like that setting, I was kind of a little bit more bothered by. Like everything else in the real world, like
Mm,
yeah, it didn't bother me too much. But once he got to like the Mattel office,
yeah.
just looked a little too cartoony
Mm.
for how the real world's supposed to be, and that stuff didn't really do it for me. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I will say when they get back to Barbie Land, there's a great bit where they see Midge, the pregnant Barbie, and
thought we discontinued.
When Will Ferrell sees her, he just goes, Midge. I don't know why that reaction got me. Just the way he delivered that, it's like a familiarity that he knows her.
Yeah.
And I'll say this real quick. My screening was just relatively full, and there wasn't a lot of reacting to jokes and funny moments, which I thought was weird. And I've mentioned a couple times on the pod how sometimes a dead audience can affect how you feel about a movie, but I felt like I was enjoying this more than most people in the theater. Like, but I don't know if that was the case, but like because people weren't laughing a lot, but that Midge joke got a huge laugh, and I was like, "Oh my god, there are people in here." Okay.
That's interesting because I actually kind of had the opposite. Well, I mean, I still had a pretty mostly full theater for this, but uh, the audience that I had they were really into it and like they were laughing start to finish basically. So that is kind of interesting, those two reactions.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of Ken as the villain in this, essentially, or the antagonist?
The antagonist, yeah. I thought that was actually a neat little twist. And I love like how Ryan Gosling or Ken, he's just kind of like uh researches about patriarchy and kind of gets
That was
obsessed.
funny.
Yeah, with
Where
like
he gets the ideas of it of patriarchy with like seeing men on horses and trucks.
yeah. But like he kind of like alienates himself to feel like that it's just the patriarchy is just horses, but like goes with it anyways. So that stuff was all really great. And he has a song at the end,
Mm,
which was fantastic and well choreographed with all the other Kens.
yes,
Um,
I did love that.
yeah, and yeah, I thought he was great. His performance throughout the whole movie, but especially at the end, like it went off so hard and it was great.
I guess the theme about Barbie Land, where everything is run by the women and the Kens are just accessories, basically, and
Hmm.
then Ken changes everything and makes it his Kendom, Kendom land, and what was his house? The
Uh,
Mojo
my Mojo Dojo Casa House.
Mo- Ken's Mojo Dojo Casa House. That stuff was funny, but I didn't love seeing Ken be the villain. Like that was like, oh, I feel bad. Like I didn't like seeing that so much personally. And the message of like, and I don't want to sound like I'm sure a lot of men are going to sound like about this movie, but there's a little bit of men bad, women good, and it's a little too simplistic in its message. Like I thought, and again, it feels like there should be more to it. It's a very broad message. They go somewhere with it, and then it's like, oh, is that it? You've said something that's a very blanket statement. The moral of it is like the way they try to get the Barbie land back is to try to like manipulate the Kens. And it's like, well, what sort of message is that? Like when
Yeah,
that sequence was happening where they're playing like a Matchbox 20 song, like "Can I play my guitar at you?" which also got a big laugh out of me. Then they
yeah,
start manipulating them and making them jealous, and it's like, again, what kind of message does that send? That's not cool. Like the message to me is a little muddled and also not clear enough because if it is Barbie and Ken, like why does Barbie not want to be with Ken? Like if he is just an accessory, why doesn't she want to be with him? Because that's part of her life, like her house and everything else.
sure.
But then it gets really weird when like Ken like when Ken takes over Barbie Land. I never quite interpret it as being like a bad thing. It just becomes male oriented, where they just go out and get beers and watch sports and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But then when Ken takes over, like it also affects the real world toys at the same time. Like, huh?
They kind of sweep that under the rug, I think. There's like
Okay,
one,
we need to talk about that part because that made no sense to me. Where, when someone tells like Will Ferrell that sales are still through the roof with this new Ken stuff, and he's like, that doesn't matter. We're a company that makes girl toys. But hold on, there was that whole thing about like there was once a woman in charge. We've had two in the history of the earth. So it's like, okay, are you genuinely trying to be a toy company for women, or are you just money hungry businessmen? Like I thought they didn't establish that well enough. I thought because
yeah.
they did both. But I did love the commercial of the sad Barbie in the middle of the film. That was
Oh,
pretty
yeah,
great.
that was great.
I don't know. What do you think of all this?
I mean, well, I kind of picked up more on like what the film was about. Like, yeah, I mean, the staging and like the final act basically in the movie is kind of has that men bad, girls get it done
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing going on. But I didn't really think about it too much outside of just like the staging of what's happening or like the physical conflicts. Like to me, I thought like the conflict in this movie was like much more internal in terms of like the connections like a toy can bring to people and
Mm-hmm.
how like something pretty small and relatively insignificant can actually like define people's lives and
Yeah.
like stuff I thought was great and I can see how it's easy to get all that muddled with like all the sort of kind of political messages the movie's sending,
Mm-hmm.
but um I really wasn't bothered by it too much, and I thought like everything for the most part kind of looked so smooth and went with the movie really well. So I honestly wasn't too bothered by that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a joke that they're like, "Oh, we'll make sure the Kens have as much power as the women do in the real world." I'm like, "What? Come on! I thought you were trying to make like a better world here. Instead, it's like a reverse of our real world."
Yeah.
And but I did, like we alluded to earlier. I mean, I love the whole Ken fight sequence, which turns into a huge musical number. Like that was spectacular.
Yeah.
I love that. But then I also like that after the vote is done, they ride imaginary horses back to where all the houses are.
And then
Like
they
the
like
shot of them all just riding nothing was great.
yeah.
Um, I have a question. Did you ever see the movie Tomorrowland?
I never did, no.
Okay, so Tomorrowland is a fascinating movie in that I don't think it's particularly good. And one of the reasons for that is that you have a protagonist that lives in a world where everything is just doom and gloom. It's like today's world, really. And she's like, well, is there nothing we can do to fix it? Which is when she brings that up, it's like a really profound message. Like, what? What are you talking? What are you suggesting here? And then towards the end of the movie, I bring this up because like it wants to do let's fix the world's problems and be yourself at the same time, which, in the Barbie movie, they collide with each other a little bit. But with Tomorrowland, the sequence where Hugh Laurie is talking about how messed up the world is, like obesity is a problem and you have world hunger at the same time. That doesn't even make sense. And it's just basic and broad in general. And yeah, these are problems in different parts of the world, but like there's more context to it. This feels like a 13-year-old looking at what's wrong with the world, and there was a little bit of that. And there was a teenager talking about what's wrong with the world at points in this movie.
Mhm.
At the same time, is that I still can't get over the logistics. I know they try to. I think they poke fun at the logistical side of how this all works with Barbie Land and the real world. Like they just gloss over that there is a portal in Venice Beach, so
Yeah.
technically any of us could go through it. Like they don't do anything to explain that, which maybe doesn't need it, but
I was fine with that, yeah.
that was strange. I mean, and then like suddenly she and Ken were just there in the real world. I thought we were going to get something like the Lego movie when we go to live action, we see Will Ferrell walking around, and you see Emmett, Batman, and all these characters in Lego form all set up. Like, I thought we were going to get something like that, where Barbie Land was actually a bunch of toys all stood together. Again, there's a lot of funny stuff in the real world, but I thought everything with Mattel was a little just underdeveloped a bit. And why were they so silly? Like, should they have been the cold, calculating businessmen? And did we need America Ferrera's character to work at Mattel? Like,
Yeah.
that had nothing to do with the rest of the story. Like, I thought maybe she was going to be on the board at the end of the film or something, which would have been a nice payoff because she has all these ideas about Barbie and she's just the receptionist. It would have made sense after her experience of going to Barbie Land that she would have something to say about the figures and then have a woman on the board and things would change, but they don't do that.
I felt like they kind of hinted towards that, but yeah, they never really show it. So
Yeah. There's a joke where she has an idea about a depressed Barbie, which she tells Will Ferrell about, and he's like, "That's a terrible idea." And someone says, "Actually, that's a great idea," and they go with it. It's going to make money. So I don't know what they're going for with the board characters, and those frustrations are there, and I feel I have to point them out. But I did have a lot of fun watching this movie. And I'd say it's a recommendation for both of us to see this. It's a lot of good fun. It's funny. The production design is great, and the musical numbers are wonderful as well. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
Do you wish? I know this is a different studio, different franchise. Do you wish that we had Jodie Benson and Michael Keaton in this movie as Barbie and Ken?
that would have been nice to see. Nice little cameos from them.
I would have maybe liked an older Barbie and Ken. Like, that would have been fun. Keaton would have been great in that role, I feel. All right. So any final words on Barbie?
No, I think we covered everything.
There we go. Well, I will. Well, I will. All right. So before we get into Oppenheimer, I do just want to formally apologize to everyone where before hopping onto this call, we were talking like, how are we going to discuss Oppenheimer? Because we both thoroughly love the work of Christopher Nolan. We anticipate everything he does. And we, just to jump the gun real quick, we both love this movie very much.
Mm-hmm.
That trying to find ways to not gush about it won't make for like the best audio podcast you could think of. But I don't know how else to go about this movie. I don't want recency bias to take over, but I'm just going to say that I think this could be Chris Nolan's best film. Certainly when you talk about the culmination of all of his work and you can see it lead up to this. I did rewatch all of Nolan's films in the lead up to this in order of their release, and especially little things like Cillian Murphy is in so many of his films and supporting roles, and seeing that culminate with him being the lead here is very satisfying as being a fan of both Nolan and Cillian Murphy. But so many actors that have had smaller roles in films, like David Dastmalchian had that small role in the Dark Knight, and Matthew Modine, and so many different actors who have roles in this. But that's something else about this. This cast is, I mean, no scene goes by without having someone in it besides one of the principal cast. Like, everyone is like, oh, I know them. I know them. I know them. There's so many actors that are recognizable in small roles, and that's what it kind of means to work with one of these filmmakers that's at the level of like a PTA, like a Wes Anderson or like a Tarantino. Like, these actors will show up because they want to work with Nolan, and that's pretty cool to see. Like, and in terms of, from a technical standpoint, it's a great achievement. Some people get tired of hearing about the no CG in a Nolan film thing, which obviously is an exaggeration. There's been plenty of CG in his films, but
yeah,
obviously he set a challenge for himself in this, that they wanted to do everything in camera and in editing, and that is amazing. There are certain shots in this film that I don't quite know how they would have achieved, or I don't know how they could have achieved it any better had they resorted to CGI. And I think my favorite sequence in the film, it's it's haunting. It's Oppenheimer is giving a speech after the bombing of Japan, and you've got this crowd of people, and the sound is design and the lighting, and you see a
Everything's
woman, which
everything's kind of muted, and like you hear screaming instead of
Mhm.
cheering, and it's really great and effective stuff.
Yeah, and you see a woman, which I believe is Chris Nolan's daughter, have her like skin fly apart like paper, and it's all done in camera, and that's really spectacular. I mean, from a filmmaking perspective, it's fun to watch, but as a story, it's a very gripping story with excellent performances. So yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, yeah, same here.
What are your thoughts on this movie?
I mean, again, like I don't know really what else to say about it, but yeah, I thought just absolutely fantastic. Uh, and Nolan, especially like I love all of his movies, but more lately, I feel like it hasn't been up to his like incredible streak he had with like from Batman Begins to Inception, where it's just like one after another, those movies just hit so perfectly, and like um, after that, I feel like they get a little bit too complicated, and a little bit too busy, especially with movies like Tenet. But with this, I mean, I think I might agree. This is probably one of her, possibly his best film he's made, right up there with Prestige. And even though I personally like Inception a little bit more, but I think this is just better crafted than that. And yeah, this is just such an effective story, and just like uh, and just like how utilized everything is. Like it has an insane runtime, like 3 hours, but it doesn't feel like it at all. Like it's
No, it
serious.
really doesn't.
It felt way shorter than it actually is, and that's just because you're never really taken out of the movie by the runtime. Like the runtime never feels like an obligation. Like you have to get through this. It felt necessary for the film, and which is crazy because so much of this movie is just people talking. Like that's basically the whole movie. It's just people
Yeah.
talking and debating on like how this should be done, or even if this should be done, and what the consequences of this will be. And everything is just done so terrifically for a movie that honestly the scale isn't that big outside of them dropping a bomb, which makes up for like 1 minute of the whole movie.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's super, super fantastic and just seamlessly done. And um, yeah, I really don't have too much to say about it, but like I want to keep talking about it though. I
Yeah,
feel
I know. Like I think this may be Nolan's most stylized film he's ever made.
yeah,
And
I could see
like he
that.
takes like lots of liberties with this where I mean well, I'm sure we'll talk about this later. It's the talk of the town. It's like there's a moment where the camera pans behind Jason Clarke where at one point you see Oppenheimer clothed, and when it pans over, he's nude, and
Yeah.
then you get like Florence Pugh just fucking him in
Hmm.
front of in front of Emily Blunt, and then that gets to when David Dastmalchian is talking about him being the pilot, and then it cuts to a shot of Cillian Murphy in the plane,
Hmm.
and it's like, oh, that's so cool.
It's really well done. And um, yeah, I would say like in terms of his filmography, he doesn't really go for that stuff too much. He likes to keep things really grounded. I think it's like a good callback to like Memento, where like
Mm,
for a split second you see Guy Pearce in the
yeah.
like mental institution, and it's like that stuff is really great, and it's love to see it. And yeah, he uses it not too much in here, but more definitely more than usual.
Mhm.
Yeah, that stuff was all great.
Yeah, and I've seen the comparison is like Nolan. Like, people are suggesting maybe Nolan is feeling guilty for The Dark Knight, kind of changing how superhero films took over cinema. And if that's his intent behind this movie, I don't think he should feel that guilt. Like that wasn't on him. That was on someone else and pumping these things out multiple times a year. But that's an interesting idea that you can apply that to other things, and this just happens to be a literal world-changing weapon that ended lives. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the most drastic part of it.
Yeah.
I guess we'll talk spoilers a little bit. Like, not that there's tons to spoil, but the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer is public record. You can read all of this if you like. It's based on a book, the screenplay. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the ending of the film being that the final reveal that Oppenheimer and Einstein talked about on the lake, and we see the shots of the. I'm just gonna get chills talking about this a bit. But we see the shots of the nuclear missiles and the sky on fire, and yeah, because we see little glimpses of it. It's a Nolan trademark, the quick shots of something. Like a
Mm-hmm.
character is thinking of something and we see just a brief shot of it, and generally we see it out of context until we get the context of it later on in the film. It's
Mm-hmm.
throughout just about all of his films, and we just see rockets at one point. They could have been silos. It was really unclear what they're they're around that fancy dinner table with the flowers in the middle, and he's looking down on the map, and it's like puddles are appearing on the map, which I guess would have been a shot overlaid on top of another, but they're meant to be bombs going off, basically. And we get a brief shot of the rockets, and then at the end of the film, we get a much clearer shot, so we know what he's thinking about, and he says to Einstein, "I came to you with an equation that it's possible that our bomb could end the world, and I think we have." And the score along with it is very, very powerful. It's
Yeah.
incredibly moving and a very profound ending that he was a brilliant man and an amazing inventor, but he did build something that could end the world. And it's not about whether he built something. It's about what will the next person do to top it.
Yeah.
Oh man. And this cast is just insane. I mean, it's a large cast.
You haven't even talked about Robert Downey Jr. yet.
No, I know.
Easily see a Best Supporting nominee or
Yeah.
for Downey Jr.
That
Um,
and Alden Ehrenreich as well, I think. I mean, he has a very small role in this film. And he's mainly in the scenes with Robert Downey Jr.
mm-hmm.
But he has probably the best line in the movie. I'm totally going to butcher the line where they're talking about what Oppenheimer and Einstein were talking about. And he's like, well, maybe they weren't talking about you. They were talking about something more important. I'm like, God, this is like the best movie ever made.
It's not far off, no.
Yeah.
um,
But then there's other great performers in this. I mean, there's Casey Affleck is really great in this.
mhm.
And I forgot Casey Affleck was in this entirely because you hear him speak without seeing his face. And I was like, what the fuck? Is that Casey Affleck? And sure enough, it was. And I had a similar thing with Gary Oldman where you hear Truman's announcement over the loudspeaker. And I was like, oh, that's Gary Oldman. I can hear it in his voice, the way he says things. Like I also forgot Rami Malek was in the movie as well. Like
Mhm.
almost a non-speaking role at first, and then he comes back later and plays a very pivotal role in changing the tide.
Yeah.
And then there's Emily Blunt, who's terrific in this.
Oh, she's fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, and like the bit where she's in the trial and she's being, accused of being a communist, and then she basically just destroys Jason Clarke in that
Yeah.
scene. And it's just so it's a very satisfying moment and a bit of an emotional moment to see her stand up for herself and her husband as well in that sense, because she's brought in as a witness. And throughout the trial portion of the film, when Oppenheimer and his legal team are discussing it, she's constantly saying that she believes that it's Strauss, and like, why won't you fight this? You're just sitting there. We kind of learn later that he knows it's something that he can't win, Oppenheimer. He knows he can't win this trial. So he just has to go along with it. He knows it's a kangaroo court, and we see him talking again to Einstein. He has a point, like the the cast you can talk about forever because there's so many people in it.
Mhm.
Um, and then there's Oppenheimer. Just I mean, going back to Oppenheimer. I mean, there's a naivete to Oppenheimer about the world, and like he goes to these rallies for all these different causes, including communism, and he's never a member himself, though his brother and his partner, who was also someone I recognized, Emma Dumont. She was Polaris in the Gifted TV show. I'm always happy to see her.
Mm-hmm.
He goes to all these things because he's interested in them. He's read these books on communism, but he's not a communist himself. But at the same time, he gives his brother the advice that don't parade this stuff around. Like, for example, Josh Hartnett's character indicates that the faculty don't agree with it, so be careful. But then he goes and does these things himself. He's kind of reckless and naive in that sense, and a tad egotistical.
Yeah.
He thinks he can get away with it because he's brilliant. And in a lot of cases, like when Matt Damon is going through all these like negatives that you're a womanizer, you're egotistical, and you're a blah, 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 blah. And he says, you didn't mention that I'm brilliant. Well, that's a given. Like, I thought that was interesting. Like, they
Mm-hmm.
don't really get into his childhood in the movie, but we see that, he was a genius as a child as well. We see him when he was it Cambridge?
Yeah, I think so.
We see James Darcy and Kenneth Branagh together again from Dunkirk. He almost dies. He poisons his apple. Like, what possesses someone to do that? We learn later that I actually liked him very much. And it's just, oh my God, that makes me think later in the film when he's writing the letter, like, condemning the practice in the faculty, and he takes a bite of an apple. And,
Mhm.
so good. What do you have anything that you want to say about it right now?
I'm seriously just trying to like think of things we haven't talked about yet, but like, I mean, I think we've gotten the point across that like, I mean, well, I mean, obviously we're Nolan shills, but more importantly, I mean, this is just an absolutely terrific film. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say about it. Another thing I want to bring up too is just
Okay.
like how like much people are or not how much, but just like people are really into this movie, and
Yeah.
the 70 millimeter IMAX theater screens. There's only a select few across the entire country.
Hmm.
Um, I live like 10 minutes away from one of them, and the movie's booked solid for like at least another 2 weeks, which is
That's insane.
absolutely insane. Like just how, because I remember like Dunkirk. I feel like Dunkirk did the same thing, where that was 70 millimeter, but it didn't feel as like crazy where like everyone needs to see this on the biggest screen. And like
Mhm.
again, considering like 99% of this movie is just people in rooms talking about and debating basically.
Yeah.
But and to see this in like such a big screen and like it's absolutely insane. And I love it. I love that like it's getting this much attention. It's pretty hard for a biopic, especially a historical biopic, like to get this much attention. But I mean, it's great though. Like this is legitimately a fantastic film. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I gather like because some people have said it's a very talking movie, and it's true. Nolan does action movies predominantly. Most of his movies have been action movies. It's apples and oranges when you compare like Tenet to Oppenheimer in terms of what type of movie that you like, but Oppenheimer, I think, was a better representation of Nolan's style of filmmaking and was a lot more cohesive of a
Mhm.
story while still being a non-linear story. And it's interesting how, like, I think Nolan's explained that the scenes in color are like from Oppenheimer's perspective, and the black and white scenes are the objective truth, like maybe from Robert Downey Jr.'s perspective, character's perspective.
That's how I interpreted it. Yeah.
And we see early in the film when it's like the court hearing where Oppenheimer disagrees with Strauss's opinion on isotopes, I think,
I think so.
and he really makes a fool out of him. And from Strauss's point of view, Downey's character, he kind of laughs it off like, well, that's Oppenheimer for you. And then the next time we see it's from more of the perspective of Oppenheimer, where he's just giving him a death stare, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's just so good.
Yeah.
The talk about criticism that I have seen is with Florence Pugh's character, where most of her scenes, she's topless. And my argument against that being a negative, and I'm not going pervy with this, though it sounds like a setup, that's what she kind of represents in Oppenheimer's life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's really all they have in common was this attraction, because he didn't want to be part of her world entirely.
Yeah.
And she was very dismissive of him trying to be romantic and all these other things. And we learned that they're married, but we see no proposal or wedding or anything. It's so sterile. Like their relationship almost beyond this physical attraction they have for each other. Like, I mean, he cheats on Emily Blunt with her, and I thought that was interesting. Like, you only really see her in moments like that, like them having a conversation about where they are in their lives, and they're both just naked, sitting across the room from one another. So I guess my argument to, we haven't had nudity in a Nolan film before, so and he just paraded Florence Pugh around, like, there is a purpose for it.
Yeah, no,
It's just whatever services the story the best is how I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It just kind of it told things about the character of Oppenheimer. It wasn't just the fact that Florence Pugh was nude. There's more to it than that. So
Yeah, and then when he's kind of recounting this that he has to bring up that that he had the affair with her, and then he learns of like her suicide,
Mhm.
and he kind of questions himself that like if he's responsible for that because of how he handled the situation. And it just goes back to like the overarching theme of like Oppenheimer, his guilt over the bomb itself.
Yeah,
So it all has a purpose.
yeah. No,
Uh,
nothing's wasted in this movie, which is like again for the sheer scale of this movie. It's hard to make a movie with like that's this big and nothing really feels out of place or unnecessary or like maybe you could have cut that out. Like everything goes together perfectly in this.
yeah.
So
Uh, like we could talk about this movie forever. Like, I mean, we'll just remember a scene and talk about how great it is. Like, we didn't even mention Jack Quaid playing the bongos.
oh my God, no.
And like, I'm not one to be like, this will be a front runner for the Oscars and things like that, especially this early in the year. I might talk about that when we're in Oscar season and it's more in people's minds, but this is one we will be talking about in like 7 months time or whenever it is.
Yeah, for sure.
And who knows if the SAG strike is still going on by that point, maybe they'll have the Oscars in an empty room.
Probably.
Yeah. And I guess that is something else I guess we've been chronicling throughout the summer period is the writer's strike and now the SAG strike. And I hope everyone gets what they're owed.
Yeah,
That's my bottom line. And
yeah.
I don't know if you heard the news recently, but A24, like the actors will actually be able to work with A24 because A24 actually agreed to the terms.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, so it's that easy.
If
Like if
only.
A24 could do it, Disney or Warner Brothers, I'm sure they can do it. It gives me some hope at least.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's good that independent films can continue because they're not part of what they're striking. But I don't know if you saw that video of Ron Perlman, but that video of him is something else. I love that man.
I never did. No, I'll check that out.
Oh, it's great. He's going on about the strike and like various uh studio CEOs. It's top notch. It's ace.
Nice.
Do you have any final words on Oppenheimer?
I don't think so. No, just
Wow.
it's definitely worth it. I mean, yeah, it's such a phenomenal film. So
Mhm.
definitely check it out.
Yes. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Chris, where can people find you on the interwebs?
on the interwebs. You can find me over on Letterboxd and Instagram.
Nice. Same here. I'm also on the Twitter. It's still somehow alive.
We'll say.
Or no. It's now X. That's right. Maybe by the time this goes live, it'll be called X.
Oh, that's right.
And but luckily, I'm on Blue Sky now. I'm officially a member of the Blue Sky. So if anyone's there, I don't think anyone is. But if you're there, I'm there. So you can check me out there. And yeah, we'll see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Bye.